All right. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us this evening for the first in a series of conversations about the town's Folly Pond and Trotting Park flood resilience project. A quick overview about this project. The town and the Sea Level Rise and Climate Committee are working with BNL Engineering and other project partners to better understand flooding, drainage, water and ecosystem protection, and road access issues at Folly Pond Crossing and the Trotting Park area of the North Haven Road. This engineering project is funded by a state community resilience partnership community action grant. And before we start, I'll introduce myself for folks who I don't already know. My name is Gabe McPhail. I contract with the town to support various projects with engagement and also do grant writing and management. And I'm joined tonight by members of the Sea Level Rise and Climate Committee. And joining me online is Kitty Wilkins, Source Water Program Manager at Maine Rural Water Association and the author of the Vinalhaven Water District's Source Water Protection Plan, and Anya Chandler from BNL Engineering, the engineering firm we are working with for this project. So I want to do a quick overview of what we'll cover tonight. So I'm going to share a bit about the origins of the project. Um, and also, excuse me, also just a little bit about what's been done to address flooding at the meadow. We're going to talk about the impacts of flooding from a public works and emergency management perspective. And then after that, we'll cover project background. Excuse me, after we cover the project background, we're going to turn things over to Kitty, who will give us a comprehensive look at the island's watershed, but Folly Pond in particular. After Kitty's presentation, I'll share a bit about the future opportunities that we have for engagement with this project and then what comes next in our conversation series. So, just a little bit of background about the project. Um, Folly Pond, this project, the Folly Pond and Trotting Park Resilience Project, as I mentioned, is an engineering and design project the town is undertaking. And why? Because we really want to look at solutions to the flooding on the North Haven Road. The goal is really to identify some practical and fundable solutions to help reduce the flood impacts, maintain safe and reliable road access, to protect the water resources, and obviously we need to do that so we can support year-round the year-round community. So it's really about sustainability, year-round viability. So the town's role here is to really be thinking about um, how we protect and maintain the infrastructure that we're responsible for over time. And then especially in places where we've got the road, we've got water, we've got wetlands, we've got flooding, all of these things are interacting. And the North Haven Road obviously is a very important public road, in terms of access. And the town really has a responsibility to understand what's happening there, what risks are increasing over time, and then like what kind of long-term improvements are needed in order to keep the area safe and keep the access open. And then at the same time, the town, the community, the water district, we have a separate but closely connected responsibility, and that is to protect and maintain the public water supply. So Folly Pond is part of that larger water system. And we know that having reliable year-round water availability is really foundational to life on the island. It supports survival, it supports public health, emergency response. It allows us to have an active working community. So basically, it's what gives us the opportunity to have a viable year-round community. So this project is really about looking at the area, this whole area as an interconnected system and making sure that future flood adaptation options are really thoughtful about water quality, water movement, the wetland, and of course, protecting the public water supply. So the scope of the project, um, th as I mentioned, we've the town has engaged BNL Engineering, and so to look at what BNL is doing, they actually were just out here on Tuesday to gather information about existing conditions at Folly Pond Crossing in the Trotting Park area. So we had a nice site visit with them. They did a bunch of survey work. They looked at both project sites, excuse me, in depth. They took a lot of pictures. They prepared for geotechnical investigations, which will be happening soon. So if you're out there, you see spray painted lines on the road. Those are to support Summit Engineering, who's coming out to take some borings as part of the geotechnical work that they're doing. So after BNL reviews like all of the data, and that's like available data, but then also the data that they've collected during their time out here. Some other data they'll look at is the base flood elevation and sea level rise precipitation projections. So after they look at all that data, they're going to develop and compare some potential adaptation options for each of the sites. So we're going to evaluate those options based on things like, how effective is that option going to be, the cost, the impacts, feasibility, and then really how well do each of the options proposed support the town's goals. And again, that's like, safe roadway access, the water protection component, supporting the wetland, and then overall long-term resilience. And the options are also, excuse me, also going to be guided by the state's recommendations for infrastructure adaptation. So the state recommends managing for approximately 1.5 feet of relative sea level rise by 2050 and 3.9 feet of sea level rise by 2100. They also recommend that projects consider high scenarios. So, for example, 3 feet by 2050 and 8.8 feet by 2100. And that's for critical long-lived infrastructure, like such as bridges, for example. So once the preferred options have been identified by the town, the community, BNL will develop some conceptual plans for those alternatives. So they'll also put together a cost estimate and then a final alternatives analysis report. So at the end of the project, we're going to have this very practical, fundable sort of next steps plan that can go into supporting future design, permitting, and eventually some construction. So the project will include many points of engagement along the way, and that's an opportunity for you to provide feedback to the engineers, but also to the town. And again, I'll share some information about how folks can engage with other points of engagement of the project at the end of this presentation. So one of the things that we're not really going to focus on tonight, and you might be wondering why, is the meadow. So in 2023, the town received a coastal community grant to do a similar project just for the meadow. Woodard and Curran did that project, and they developed a final alternatives analysis for roadway adaptation strategies for that area. The solutions involved elevating the roadway and also installing new culverts with tidal gates at the Vinyl Cove Inlet on Round the Island Road, through which the water to the wetland is fed. The town discussed those solutions and decided not to pursue them at the time, and instead thought that, okay, let's look at the Folly Pond and Trotting Park areas first, then consider if one larger project or a phased larger project could be grant funded and constructed. So the Vinyl Cove's alternative analysis, it is available on the town's website. If anyone is interested in viewing it, you can also contact me directly and I will send it to you. So let's take a look at some flooding in this area. So for folks who travel the North Haven Road regularly, you know that the meadow experiences monthly tidal flooding. The Sea Level Rise and Climate Committee have been measuring flood levels at the site for several years. They have a whole bunch of data around the water levels in that area. Folly Pond has flooded during severe rain events and also drainage blockages. And in October of 2024, we had some really heavy precipitation, and those rains washed the roadway out, creating an approximately 8 foot wide by 5 foot deep washout. And that cut off access between the lower part of North Haven Road and uh, the 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 uh, n- the northern part of North Haven Road, but also to Calderwood Neck Road. So flooding at Folly Pond, some additional flooding that we've seen happening there in the spring of 2025. There was a beaver dam that blocked the culvert, and this caused the road to have water overtopping the road. Um, And then during high tide, we know that the Trotting Park also floods. And I think now we see that happening, the Trotting Park area happening, flooding happening there like almost monthly. So when we see the road flood in these areas, the first concern really is safety. So, driving through the floodwaters, it can be very dangerous. Walking through the floodwaters can be dangerous. It's hard to see the surface of the road. It's hard to see the shoulder. And also, even the shallow water, it can be moving and, just to provide a very unsafe condition for travel. But it also, if the waters are high enough, you're blocking access. So critical vehicles such as like emergency vehicles, town service vehicles can't get through from one side to the other. Um, so one of the other issues with flooding over the road top is that it weakens the road over time. And so that repeated flooding is damaging the pavement, it softens the road base, it reduces the road's ability to carry weight. So, it is going to sink as traffic goes over it. So at Folly Pond, you can see from the image here that was this kind of erosion that the scour really contributed to the washout. So over time, the flooding, just weakened that surface and contributed to the washout. So floodwaters also, they can carry debris, and that debris can plug up the culverts. It can flow into ditches, and that can exacerbate the flooding. So, with the town, the goal is to maintain the safe road access to reduce flood impacts where possible. And as we mentioned, to protect the water resource. And we talked about this, this project is really being about the whole system. It's not just about, safe roadway access. So we really want to look more closely at this system. We want to look more closely at the watershed and Folly Pond. And to help us do that, we've asked Kitty Wilkin, who I mentioned authored the Water District's Source Water Protection Plan, to come and share her knowledge about the watershed and the Folly Pond area with us. So with that, I will stop sharing so Kitty can share her screen and walk us through some information about Folly Pond. Thank you, Kitty.
Great, you're welcome. Get this up here. Let's see here. Okay, does that work? Can you see the right bits? Okay, excellent. Thank you, Gabe. I am, as Gabe said, I'm Kitty Wilkin. I'm the Source Water Program Manager at Maine Rural Water Association, and I've been working with the Vinalhaven Water District the past year plus to create a source water protection plan. And so tonight I'm just going to tell you a little bit about Vinalhaven's drinking water and the importance of protecting it and why it is involved in this Folly Pond Trotting Park project. So, Vinalhaven drinking water, why protecting the source is essential. Let's get started. So the goal of a source water protection plan is to reduce or eliminate existing and potential risks to the drinking water source. The drinking water source for Vinalhaven is Round Pond, which is hydrologically connected to Folly Pond. It's directly north of Folly Pond. It provides fire protection to the local area and drinking water for approximately 820 people year round and 1,200 people during the summer months. The remaining residents of Vinalhaven who don't get district water, which is approximately 450 year-round residents and between 2,500 and 3,500 in the summer, rely on private drinking water wells for fresh water. It's important to remember that surface water and freshwater, groundwater are all interconnected, especially on an island like Vinalhaven. All the water sources are connected and it's a limited resource. It's very important to protect that resource. So let's take a look at Vinalhaven's drinking water system, an overview of for the folks who get town water, who are part of the Vinalhaven Water District service area. This is where your water is coming from. So raw water, which is just regular untreated pond water, is pumped from Round Pond, which you can see on the left. This pump station pumps it to a water treatment plant located at the south shore of Folly Pond. And I'll show you an overview look at it so that you can situationally place these photos. But after pumping raw water to the water treatment plant, the water is then filtered and treated to remove parasites and viruses, to disinfect the water and adjust the pH. And then it is piped 2 miles to the shack where it begins distribution to customers. And main distribution is right in downtown Vinalhaven. That's where the bulk of water district water users live. So looking at source water protection, so source water is the origin of your drinking water. And so for Vinalhaven, the source water is Round Pond, which you can see at the top of this map. Round Pond is directly north of Folly Pond. And on that aerial photograph, it looks like there's a lot of forest or upland or like the little brown spots, there's wetlands. Currently, a lot of that area is inundated, which means there's standing water there all of the time. So hydrologically, Round Pond and Folly Pond are a lot more interconnected than they appear in this map. But when looking at source water protection, we look at a watershed-based approach. A watershed is any area in which rain will slowly work its way down to the water source. So essentially, it's usually determined based on elevation. It's kind of like the high ridge around Round Pond, Folly Pond, Otter Pond, and anything that rains or any runoff or any spills or oil spills or fertilizers or pesticides applied, they all will work their way down to the drinking water source. Taking a watershed-based approach helps protect the drinking water more. And so you can see the green line is the boundaries of the watershed that was looked at for the source water protection plan. Taking a closer look at the water source, this is Round Pond. You can see the frontage of North Haven Road. There's about 100 feet of North Haven Road that runs right along Round Pond. Here's the pump house that I showed you. That's right at the edge of Round Pond that pumps the water down to Folly Pond. You can see here that the proximity of the road is right next to the drinking water source. Means that this is an area that's of the utmost importance for protection. Drinking water, ideally, the land around a drinking water source should be as undeveloped as possible. Because of the nature of Vinalhaven, North Haven Road is a very essential roadway to get from north of the island to the south of the island. And they're looking at analysis. There's not other places the road can be, but it's a point in which human access to the water is right there. So it's really important to be aware of that and be very careful to drive safely and minimize the human impact to the water source. Here's a view of another look at Round Pond from there's a series of trails right east of the pond that give you a good lookout over the pond if you want to take a closer look at your water source. And then you can see there's also the view of that pump house and the photo on the right, the pump house that pumps the water down to the water district water treatment plant is on the left, and on the right is a little pump house that's a private landowner has rights to the water as well. So, looking at the overview, that yellow star is where the pump house on Round Pond pumps water, and right down along that line toward Folly Pond. You can see in Folly Pond, if you look to the right, that rightmost point is where the Folly Pond Road Crossing project is happening. All of this area is very hydrologically interconnected, which means that it's important to protect the water in all of those areas and minimizing flooding, reducing the possibility that the tidal floods from the Vinyl Cove Inlet could come into Pond, Round Pond hydrological system is important to look at. And this project that we're talking about, the Folly Pond Resiliency Project, will address that, which is great. Here's a look at Folly Pond. See, this is a view of the pump house up toward the pump station. So if you look smack dab in the middle of the furthest point there, the pump station is right through those trees, and Round Pond is right beyond. Boating is allowed on Round Pond, I mean, on Folly Pond. No swimming is allowed, which is good. In Round Pond, there are limitations. There's no swimming, there's no boating, there's no surface recreational use, which is a safety measure to protect drinking water. Some boating can happen and fishing happens on Folly Pond. There is a lot of beaver activity on Folly Pond, which is both a pro and a con. Sometimes beaver activity can be a challenge for drinking water quality, but at the same time, especially in this situation, the beavers have dammed Folly Pond to kind of protect that road crossing, which I'll show you in. You can see here, this is that edge of the water that you're seeing with all of the sticks lined up. That is all a beaver dam. And that beaver constructed dam keeps the water level of Folly Pond quite a number of feet above the road crossing below. And I'll show you another picture to situationally place it. But in this case, the beavers are kind of protecting the road from washing out. And as Gabe showed, you could see what happened when the culvert was blocked by beavers and what would happen if this dam were to give way or if the beaver were not there to build it. Flooding would be a lot more frequent. So here's another look at that edge. And on the right, this cage and culvert is called a beaver deceiver, and it was installed after the flooding to hopefully prevent that flooding again. What it does is you can see there's a little cage a little bit in the distance, and the water intake is out there. And then it comes through that culvert into this other cage, which is around the inside of the culvert, the inlet. And so the beavers can dam all around that, and they think they're damming the flow of water, but water is still able to go through. It's effective, but it takes a lot of maintenance to maintain, but it still has been very beneficial in this place in reducing the flooding due to beaver blockage of the culvert. Here's another look along the North Haven Road. This is right at the Folly Pond Crossing. You can kind of see the cage in the middle of that water. That's the inlet of the beaver deceiver, and then the inlet of the culvert goes right under the road there. Just another look for placing where all of this is happening. On the other side of that culvert, crossing the Folly Pond Road crossing, this is the outlet. It comes out with two culverts there, and the view on the right is the view down toward Vinyl Cove. This right here is the high point of the 100-year flood for Vinyl Cove. And Vinyl Cove is a saline water body, salt water. So one concern is we don't want floodwaters from Vinyl Cove, the salt water, to come into Folly Pond because it's interconnected with Round Pond, which is a drinking water source, and saltwater and freshwater don't mix when it comes to drinking water. The space between Folly Pond and Round Pond, this is, in the aerial photograph, it looked brown, it looked like wetlands or maybe forest, but it's actually inundated wetlands, a more like swamp-like environment. It's beautiful. Wetlands are great for water quality for groundwater. Wetlands are nature's kidneys. So having wetland habitats, especially thriving, vibrant wetlands like the ones in the Round Pond, Folly Pond watershed, is really a positive thing for groundwater quality, for the aquifers beneath the ground. There's also a system of trails around Round Pond and Folly Pond if you want to more intimately know the drinking water source watershed. There are signs, they're maintained by the Vinalhaven Land Trust, and this is one that I showed a picture from earlier where you can walk up around and overlook Round Pond. There's the kind of overview lookout of Round Pond, the drinking water source, and some cool trees along the way. It's worth checking out. There's also signage about the environment around in the watershed. The bulk of the watershed is forested or wetland forested, and which is wonderful. The best way to protect a drinking water source is to have it be owned by the water district so that it's completely undeveloped. But an important acknowledgement of a source water protection plan is balancing human use of the area and understanding of the environment and protection of the drinking water source. And so the Vinalhaven Land Trust does a great job of sharing about the different species that grow in this red maple alluvial swamp. Um, Access to it will help you more intimately know it, as long as you do a leave no trace practices, because it is a drinking water source. There's also great signage around Pond Watershed Drinking Water Protection Area. The land trust trails are well marked, which are important steps to drinking water protection, because when you know that it's a drinking water protection area, that helps you make the right choices and being a little extra careful with vehicles and waste, carry your garbage out, all of that. So beyond freshwater, the drinking water source, the surface water, drinking water from Round Pond, the rest of the island residents rely on private wells. And I wanted to talk a little bit about fresh groundwater on Vinalhaven because it is definitely one of the things that needs to be thought about and acknowledged in your daily use of water, and also just to better understand where your drinking water comes from. So this is a graphic from the U.S. Geological Survey, a fact sheet that is from an article from a different island, but it is a good visual representation of what the fresh groundwater under Vinalhaven may look like. When talking about groundwater, fresh groundwater for an island, because you're surrounded by seawater, a lot of people wonder, like, is there an underground river? Is there this? This is usually what fresh groundwater looks like. It's called a fresh groundwater lens because it's very lens shaped. And you can see there's the saline groundwater in the ground, and then that transition to the fresh groundwater. In When you have a sole source island aquifer, which is what Vinalhaven has, that means that this is the only freshwater source on the island, which means it's extra important to protect. As you draw from the water, here's an illustration of a private well, and a well is put into the ground. And then as you draw from the well, it's kind of like drinking through a straw. So when you're drawing the fresh water from the well, that brings the saline groundwater, that interface or the transition closer to the intake at the bottom of that well. If your well is close enough to that freshwater saline water interface, or if too much water is drawn, that pull could result in the saline groundwater coming up and crossing into the intake of your well, which would be a negative impact of saltwater intrusion. There have been some wells on Vinalhaven that have gone salt, that have saltwater now and are no longer viable drinking water sources. And so that is something that's really important to keep in mind on the island of Vinalhaven, is that all of the fresh water is precious and a resource that should be used very mindfully. This is just a visual so you can have a better idea of how it looks when you are getting, like, where your fresh water is coming from when you use a private well, and also how that saltwater interface can become a problem if too much water is used or the wells are installed too deep or too close to the saltwater freshwater interface. Things to keep in mind for those of us or those of you on Vinalhaven drinking water from a private well. A little joke that came up in the planning team discussions about this project and drinking water on Vinalhaven in general. Island water, do not take it for granted. A little nod to Vinalhaven's granite past and present. As I mentioned, it's really important to recognize and remember that all fresh water on the island, both surface water in Round Pond and Folly Pond, and groundwater, are precious and should be conserved. Using less water will help prevent the draw of saltwater interface too much toward the drinking water wells, which is good. We want that saltwater interface to not come into the drinking water wells. So looking at a source water protection plan, the main big step to look at key threats and challenges. The idea is that by identifying potential challenges ahead of time and taking small steps now to prevent them or reduce the chance of them happening, you save a lot of money and effort and headache really in the future. Because if you can avoid the key threats and challenges now, you protect your drinking water source because it's way better to do that now than to have a contaminated drinking water source, to have saltwater intrusion be a bigger problem. All of the potential challenges, we can avoid them by taking some steps now. So there's a lot of information here. I'm just going to quickly go through some of these. But these were the source water protection plan identified these as potential concerns. Residential use within the watershed of Round Pond, Folly Pond, there are not any residences right within, there are adjacent. But also living on an island, residential use is also going to impact the groundwater. So important things to keep in mind. Hazards that could come from residential use are the use and storage of oil and other hazardous materials, pesticides and fertilizers. Agricultural operations and animal husbandry could lead to contamination with nitrate and or pathogens, and leaky home heating oil tanks or septic systems. So it's important to service your septic system. Have your septic tank pumped regularly, make sure it's functioning and not leaking. Minimize or reduce or remove the use of pesticides and fertilizers. There are a lot of steps you could take as a residential homeowner to improve drinking water quality. Another risk is public access and boat launch. And as I mentioned, there's no public access allowed on Round Pond, the drinking water source, which is good. It should remain that way. But even public access and boat access on Folly Pond, you want to keep in mind, you want to reduce the potential contaminants, which would be polluted runoff, which could be nutrients, petroleum products from impervious and or compacted land surfaces. So North Haven Road right there is an impact because anything running off from there is running straight into the drinking water source. Boat access could also introduce an aquatic invasive species. It could introduce petroleum products from in-lake use, depending on your boat. It could introduce nitrogen compounds and pathogens from bodily contact. Solid waste disposal while you are accessing there, it could be a concern, and access for intentional harm for the source or drinking water source is made available when there's public access and boating. Future development is also a concern. The most effective means to protect a drinking water source is for the water system to own or have legal control of the land around its source. And Vinalhaven Water District does own 70% of the shoreline around Round Pond, and between Vinalhaven Water District, Vinalhaven Land Trust, Maine Conservation Heritage Trust, a lot of the watershed is owned and protected, which is wonderful. And Vinalhaven Water District is continuing to go toward looking to purchase properties within the watershed for better source water protection. All good things. Surface use recreation. There's no surface use or recreational access permitted on Round Pond, which, as we mentioned, is a good thing. Continuing to respect that is important. Recreational hiking trails have both positive and the potential for negative impacts to the watershed. As I mentioned, having access to the environment, it has been shown that when you intimately know something, you're much more prone to want to protect it and take care of it. And so being able to walk through the woods and learn about the species of plants and animals and ecosystems that live there, that's a benefit in education and awareness of the importance of those ecosystems on our drinking water source and our everyday activities. And at the same time, when humans walk somewhere, we bring with us trash, we have waste, we have pets with pet waste, we drive cars to get there. Cars have petroleum products, other fluids that may not be beneficial to the water system. So being sure to use a leave no trace practice and minimizing that human impact to the environment is important when you're enjoying the recreational hiking trails. Transportation, roads and driveways is another concern. Again, a lot of what I'm talking about is a human impact to a natural element. The proximity of Round Pond to North Haven Road for 800 feet is one of the primary concerns for potential risk to the water source. And things that can happen both winter salt application, but also accidental fuel or cargo spills are the concerns. And road crews and property owners and anyone driving on North Haven Road can keep the road and shoulder stable, ditches protected with vegetation and or rock depending on the slope, maintain drainage features, including inlet and outlet protection at culverts to maintain the crown on gravel roads. All of that will be part of what is considered in the Folly Pond Road crossing to help make sure that the impact is as minimal as possible to water quality. Drought and rainfall can also be a mechanism that brings pollutants from the watershed into the pond, especially lately as storms are changing from being interspersed regularly. We are seeing more prolonged periods of drought and then big rainstorms with a lot of water. And what that does is it creates more stormwater runoff. And when the ground is parched and dry, then when it rains, the rain is less able to infiltrate into the ground. So instead, it runs along the surface of the ground, picking up all of the animal waste, petroleum products, contaminants, anything on the surface, and then running into the water source. So that creates a greater risk to water quality. Fortunately, the watershed of Round Pond is forested, contains wetland areas with a little bit of light residential development. Because of the forested and wetland areas, it reduces the risks of contamination from stormwater runoff. Still something to keep in mind and keep an eye on. And also surface water quality monitoring will continue to be important in seeing how that impact is happening or not happening. Coastal flooding. So here's a map that I want you to take a close look at. That purple is the 100-year flooding according to the FEMA flood maps. We are in a period of life now where 100-year floods no longer happen once every 100 years. That was determined as like once every 100 years there will be a flood this big. Now, or in recent years, 100-year flood zones have flooding more frequently. That purple is the 100-year flood for Vinyl Cove, and you can see the road crossing between Folly Pond and that purple flood zone. It's right there across that culvert. That's where the Folly Pond Road project is happening. As I mentioned, Folly Pond and Round Pond, we already know those are hydrologically connected. There's surface water inundation pretty much right from Round Pond to Folly Pond. And so if that salt water were to encroach over the road or cross into Folly Pond, that creates another risk for drinking water quality and for keeping the fresh water source protected and clean. Again, the Folly Pond and Trotting Park Flood Resiliency Project will directly address this risk, which is why it's really important that we're moving forward with this and considering the potential impacts to drinking water quality. The potential inland reach of saltwater intrusion has not been systematically studied in Maine yet, but there's a lot of ongoing studies happening both for inundation of land surface during coastal storm surges or higher tides from sea level rise, and also saltwater intrusion from underground for groundwater. And so all of that research is happening now so that we can better plan for the future. Saltwater intrusion, again, so that was coastal flooding, more of a surface impact of saltwater on the freshwater on Vinalhaven. Saltwater intrusion is the impact of the salt saline groundwater on groundwater surface or groundwater drinking sources. And again, sea level rise can have an impact on that as well. From below, sea level rise can permanently replace freshwater volume in a coastal aquifer with saltwater. The vulnerability of coastal aquifers is geographically complicated by the shape of estuaries, local and regional freshwater hydrology, surficial geology, bedrock fractures, and water withdrawal. So there are a lot of elements that will influence how vulnerable this particular groundwater source is to saltwater intrusion. And we're looking into all of that now to hopefully help with future planning. And it is important that these factors be considered in future planning and preparing to manage for a potentially higher sea level rise scenario. Hazardous materials and petroleum products, again, human impacts to water quality. Hazardous materials could include petroleum products found in storage tanks, automobiles, boats, household items such as lawnmowers, snow blowers, solvents, batteries, and many other items contain hazardous materials and are considered to be potential contaminant sources. So we're not saying don't mow your lawn, don't go on a snowmobile, don't use a snowblower, but when you are using a household hazardous waste, when you are using, or when you are disposing of those household hazardous waste, be sure to use the hazardous waste disposal days and dispose of the waste properly. I know 50 years ago, getting rid of old motor oil meant throwing it in the woods behind your house. We now know that that is not a viable source, and there are household hazardous waste disposal days, so please look them up and use them when disposing of hazardous wastes. Proactive protection matters. This is a sign from Round Pond, no swimming. It's clearly marked. It really makes a big difference to take those steps now to prevent a negative impact from happening. And the Vinalhaven Water District has a lot of protections in place. 70% of the shoreline is owned by Vinalhaven Water District, Vinalhaven Land Trust, or the town. Continued efforts to purchase the parcels within the watershed are happening. Shoreland zoning limits development within 250 feet of the pond. There's water quality monitoring that is ongoing, monitoring of structures and facilities, clear signage showing that it is a drinking water protection area and limiting recreational activities, and also continual update of emergency plans and watershed surveys. Source water protection is an ongoing thing, and we are all continuing to work on it and looking forward to work with all of the residents of Vinalhaven to make sure the drinking water source, both surface water and groundwater, is resilient and can last and sustain the community for many generations to come. 5 ways you can conserve drinking water. I know there's a lot that could happen, and there are easy things that you can do starting today to help protect your drinking water. You can fix leaks. Small leaks in faucets, toilets, and pipes can waste gallons of water daily if not fixed. You can minimize water usage. Turn off the faucet while you're brushing your teeth. Take shorter showers. Only run the dishwasher and washing machines when they're full. You can use drip irrigation to water gardens or water early in the morning or late in the evening to minimize evaporation. You could prevent pollution, so limit the use of herbicides and pesticides, dispose of automotive fluids properly, pump your septic tank every 3 to 5 years. And finally, you can protect the watershed. Preserving the forest and wetlands, which naturally filter water and protect against contamination, is a wonderful step to protecting drinking water. Nature has its filtration built in. We just need to not cut it down and build houses instead. So being very aware of protecting the land within the watershed and preserving forests and wetlands on the island in general is an important step that we can take to protect and conserve drinking water. And that is the end of my presentation. So thank you very much for listening and for being a part of the protection of Vinalhaven's drinking water resources, both surface water and groundwater. Feel free to reach out at any point if you have questions, and I will pass it back to Gabe for the rest of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kitty. This very informative, and as a resident of Vinalhaven, I really appreciate learning a lot more about the watershed and the watershed protection, and also just really to seeing the interconnectedness of the water bodies and the significance of the watershed. So thank you so much for that.
You're very welcome.
So I want to offer next ways that you all can stay involved and participate in future conversations in this series of conversations throughout this project. So we're going to have 3 more opportunities for engagement with B&L Engineering directly. So we really encourage folks, like this is where we start to get into the meat of the project, if you will. So our next event is going to be another hybrid event at the town office and on Zoom. And you know what I'll share about that is B&L will be discussing their what they learned when they came and did their site visit, but also they really want to hear from folks who know the project area, live in the project area, understand the significance of flood impacts, the environment concerns that they have. So that will be, that will be happening, and I'll share just a little bit more in a minute about that. But let me cover really quickly about the rest of BNL's schedule. So, by September, they're going to have their initial alternatives analysis completed, and we'll have another point of engagement at that time. They will share these alternatives with us that they've explored, and we'll be able to provide some feedback. Um, and then shortly after that, they will take the information that they learned from us during that engagement event in September and will be able to complete some conceptual designs for the selected alternatives. And we'll have another event at that time to get feedback on those conceptual designs. And from there, they can move forward and sort of putting together their final report. And that will be that will include like a 10% version of the conceptual designs. So that means the project will likely wrap up by early next year. So I want to just share a little bit more about that next conversation. It's going to be happening on Thursday, June 25th. And as I mentioned, it's hybrid. So it'll be on Zoom, as well as have the ability for folks to join from the town office. We're really hoping the engineers will be able to participate in person at the town office. So it'll be from 6 to 7:15, and we really encourage folks, again, to come and share your thoughts, your ideas, your concerns, your observations. Like, the engineers need that information in order to really understand the project area, but also to come up with their uh, solutions for the issues of flooding in that area, while again, protecting the water source, protecting the environment around the roadways. So please, please attend if you can. We're also encouraging folks, if you have any feedback, if you can't attend an event, but you want to offer some thoughts and ideas in a constructive way, we do have this online Google form, which is the QR code that you see here. You can scan that QR code and access a feedback form that has some questions, and then just a block for general comments as well. So we will be collecting that throughout the project. It'll be live throughout the project. So at any time, please share your thoughts and ideas. Of course, you can always reach out to Town Manager Marjorie Stratton, Public Works Director Millie Martin, any members of the Sea Level Rise Committee, and also you can reach out directly to me. The town has a webpage for the Folly Pond project. It's under the Sea Level Rise and Climate Committee's page on the town website. So you should be able to find it there. If you want more information about the engagement events, they will be on, or they are on, the town calendar on the town website, which is just townofvinalhaven.org. So I just want to thank everyone for listening in. Thank Kitty again for her informative presentation, and just let folks know that we will post a link to this recording on the Folly Pond webpage on the town website, and it'll also be on the town's YouTube channel. So just want to thank everybody again, and thank you, Kitty.
Thank you.